The most feared mafia boss in Seoul hired a ghost from a disavowed Black Ops program. She dismantled an entire army of assassins in one night. They laughed when she walked into the marble chamber. A black woman in a tactical jacket and combat braids standing before the Black Serpent himself, Lee Dong-hyuk. One guard spat on the floor near her boots. Another whispered that the boss must be losing his mind to bring an outsider, a woman no less, into the inner sanctum. Zara Coleman heard every word. She understood the tone of every insult. She didn't flinch. She simply filed every face away for later. When Lee's lieutenant demanded her credentials, she didn't hand over a resume. She slid a single grainy photograph across the mahogany table. It showed a fortified European training compound cratered by explosives, walls collapsed, bodies unmoving in the smoke. Authorized Onyx Black Site. 53 hostile operatives, she said, her voice dead calm. I walked out. They didn't. My resume is the silence I leave behind. My credentials are buried in government files that officially do not exist. You don't hire me because you trust me, Mr. Lee. You hire me because you are out of options. 12 hours later, 50 elite killers would lie broken across the stone steps of the estate, and the only person still standing was the woman they had mocked. Those guards made the mistake of underestimating greatness because of how it looked. Don't make the same mistake with this channel. Most people watch, take the value, and leave like a ghost. Prove you're not just passing through. Subscribe now, or admit you're just another doubter in the room. Lee Dong-hyuk had built the Black Serpent Syndicate on a foundation of cold calculation and absolute order. From the shipping docks of Incheon to the high-rises of Gangnam, his influence was absolute. For a decade, the man with the dragon tattoos climbing his neck had outsmarted rivals, brokered international deals, and maintained a peace that no one dared break. But now, the predator had become the prey. It started with silence, allies vanishing without a trace. Then came the noise, a car bomb that incinerated his convoy but missed him by seconds, a sniper's bullet that shattered his Scotch glass, a poison attempt that left 3 of his tasters dead. A coalition of international syndicates had placed a $30 million bounty on his head, and the wolves were circling. The final straw was his head of security. A man loyal to the bone, found dead, with a message carved into the wall above him. New moon, final breath. Lee knew the date. 5 days. 5 days until the coordinated strike that would wipe his empire off the map. Desperation forces even a king to look outside his castle walls. It made Lee Dong-hyuk consider the unthinkable, bringing in a weapon he couldn't control. Zara wasn't looking for a war, she was looking to disappear. Since escaping the classified operations in Eastern Europe, she had been living off-grid in Seoul, a ghost haunting the neon streets, trying to outrun the memories of the unit that betrayed her. She took cash jobs. She stayed invisible. She tried to forget the lethal efficiency Onyx had drilled into her bones, but you can't turn off a reflex. When the robbery went down at the convenience store, Zara was just there for coffee. 4 armed men, twitchy and aggressive, threatening a terrifying shopkeeper. They didn't look at the woman in the corner. They saw a bystander. That was their mistake. 22 seconds. That's all it took. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Just the precise surgical violence of a woman trained to topple governments. Lee's scouts were watching the street that night, and what they saw made them realize one thing. The only thing deadlier than the assassins coming for Lee was her. The smell of fear in the Black Serpent boardroom was subtle, a mix of stale espresso, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Lee Dong-hyuk sat at the head of the obsidian table, his face a mask of indifference, though his empire was burning at the edges. The Busan supply lines are dark, a lieutenant muttered, refusing to meet Lee's eyes. And the triads in Macau have stopped returning calls. They're claiming technical difficulties, but we know what that means. It means they are waiting to see if I survive the week, Lee said, his voice dangerously low. the silence that followed was heavy. The $30 million bounty hadn't just invited enemies, it had weaponized Lee's own ecosystem. Allies were fleeing. Rivals were circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Zara stood in the corner, motionless, arms crossed over her tactical jacket. To the 7 men at the table, Lee's inner circle, she was an absurdity, a foreigner, a woman, an aesthetic choice made by a desperate man. With all due respect, boss, a thick-necked enforcer named Kang scoffed, gesturing a heavy hand toward Zara. We have 300 soldiers on the payroll. Why is she here? We need guns, not a babysitter. Zara didn't speak. She just watched. She was dissecting them. She catalogued the micro-expressions, the shifting postures, the beads of sweat on upper lips. She identified 3 anomalies immediately: the treasurer, whose hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with his cufflink, signs of debt or perhaps blackmail; the operations chief, who was too loud, too aggressive, overcompensating for fear. And then there was the strategist, Kim Jae-wook. He was too still. While the others radiated anxiety, his pulse, visible in the vein of his neck, was rhythmic and slow. Deception, Zara noted. Deception comes in many forms: fear, greed, and patience. She is here, Lee said, silencing the room with a sharp glare, because your 300 soldiers allowed a sniper within 50 yards of my bedroom window. Meeting adjourned. As the men filed out, casting resentful glances at Zara, she moved. Tour. Now, she said. It wasn't a request. Lee stood, adjusting his suit jacket. Try not to insult too many of them, Ms. Coleman. I don't insult. I evaluate. They moved through the sprawling estate. To the untrained eye, the compound was a fortress. High walls, armed patrols, state-of-the-art surveillance. To Zara, it was a sieve. She stopped at the south gate. 2 guards were leaning against the wall, smoking, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. Zara walked up to the larger one. Before he could register her presence, she had slipped the magazine out of his rifle and tossed it onto the pavement. You're dead, she said, stepping over the magazine. And so is he. She kept walking, leaving the guards stunned. Blind spot, she pointed to a gap between 2 camera rotations in the hallway. 12 seconds of invisibility, enough to plant a bomb. She moved deeper into the house, her eyes scanning the architecture. She stopped at a wood-paneled wall in the basement corridor. She ran her hand along the molding, feeling for air pressure. This wall is hollow. It's a load-bearing structure, Lee corrected. No, it's an ingress. Zara pressed her boot against the panel and kicked. The wood splintered, revealing a narrow, dust-filled maintenance tunnel leading into the sewer system. Lee stared at the hole, his composure cracking for the first time. I have lived here for 10 years. That is not on the blueprints. Someone added it, Zara said, shining her flashlight into the dark void. Recently. She pulled a device from her pocket, a signal analyzer, and swept the room. It shrieked near the encrypted server rack. Your comms are being mirrored. Whoever is hunting you isn't just listening. They're routing your orders to themselves. They retreated to Lee's private study, the only room Zara deemed secure after a sweep. Lee poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. The reality of the infiltration was setting in. They aren't just trying to kill me, Lee murmured. They are dismantling me. Who? Zara asked. 30 million is a lot for a turf war. This isn't about drugs or territory. Lee walked to a safe behind his desk. He pulled out a black hard drive, heavy and unmarked. This, Lee said, I call them the ledgers. 10 years of data on money laundering pipelines. Not just syndicates, Ms. Coleman. Senators, tech CEOs, intelligence directors. I facilitate the black money for half the G20 nations. Zara looked at the drive, and the pieces clicked into place: the military-grade surveillance, the precision of the attacks, the silence of the allies. The bounty isn't criminal, Zara said, her voice dropping. It's a cleanup operation. What do you mean? The people coming for you aren't rivals, Lee. They're cleaners. Zara looked at the window, knowing the enemy was already watching. This is geopolitical, and they won't stop until you, and everyone who has seen this drive, are erased from history. Lee is realizing that loyalty is rare. It's actually kind of tragic. Thousands of you will watch a man lose his soul, yet won't offer the basic loyalty of a subscription. Don't be like the snakes in Lee's inner circle, taking without giving back. Hit subscribe. Show us whose side you're on. Zara stared at the encrypted drive on Lee's desk, her fingers tracing the faint scar that ran along her hairline. The encryption algorithm wasn't standard criminal code. It wasn't the sloppy, brute force locking mechanisms used by the triads or the Yakuza. It was a shifting polyphasic key. It was the digital signature of a ghost. For a moment, the mahogany study dissolved. Zara was back in a windowless concrete room in Brussels. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic. She was 22, her head shaved, her name stripped away and replaced with a call sign. She was learning how to destabilize economies, how to trigger coups, and how to kill without leaving a forensic trace. She was learning to be Onyx. She had given them everything, her identity, her morality. And when a mission in Eastern Europe went sideways, when she refused an order to liquidate a civilian safe house, they had tried to liquidate her instead. She had escaped the kill box by inches, leaving a trail of bodies that used to be her friends. Ms. Coleman? Lee's voice pulled her back to Seoul. He was watching her, his expression a mix of curiosity and growing dread. You look like you've seen a ghost. I was one, Zara murmured, her voice hollow. Lee leaned forward, the shadows from the desk lamp cutting across his face. Who is hunting me, Zara? You said this is geopolitical. Who has the resources to mirror my communications and bypass my security? Zara met his gaze, her eyes cold and unblinking. People who don't officially exist. She didn't wait for him to ask more. She pulled the signal analyzer from her pocket again. The device was chirping, a rhythmic high-frequency pulse that shouldn't be there. The signal isn't just mirroring, she said, moving toward the far wall where a heavy, masterful painting hung. It's broadcasting. She gripped the frame of the painting and swung it aside to reveal a wall safe. But she didn't look at the safe. She looked at the ventilation duct above it. With a swift motion, she dragged a heavy chair over, climbed up, and ripped the grate loose. Inside, blinking with a soft, malevolent green light, was a black box the size of a deck of cards. It was hardwired into the building's main power line. Military-grade relay, Zara said, dropping back to the floor with the device in hand. Routed through low-orbit satellites. This tech isn't available on the black market, Lee. This is state-sponsored. Only a program like Onyx could deploy this deep without tripping your alarms. Lee stared at the device, his face paling. Onyx? The rumors. I thought they were a myth. A bedtime story for intelligence agents. We were very real, Zara said, cracking the casing open to reveal the circuitry, and we don't leave loose ends. She walked back to the desk and plugged the device into Lee's terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She bypassed the relay's firewall in seconds. She knew the back door because she had been trained by the people who built it. Rows of data scrolled down the screen. Timestamps, audio logs, GPS coordinates of every lieutenant in the syndicate. They have eyes on everything, Lee whispered. No, Zara corrected, pointing to a specific column of data. They have help. She highlighted a series of log entries. Look here. The perimeter sensors on the north wall were cycled off for 3 minutes every night at 2 o'clock a.m. The biometric locks on the server room were updated remotely. The shift schedules for your personal guard were uploaded to an external server 6 hours before the roster was even printed. Lee looked at the screen, struggling to comprehend the betrayal. This? This requires high-level clearance. Only my inner circle has these codes. Exactly. Zara straightened up, the tactical jacket shifting with the movement. The tension in the room shifted from fear to something sharper, colder. The threat wasn't just at the gates anymore, it was sitting at the dinner table. Lee sank into his chair, the weight of his collapsing empire pressing down on him. I trusted them. They are family. Loyalty is a currency, Lee, and someone just bought a lot of it. Zara turned to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate that was no longer a fortress, but a cage. Someone close to you set the table, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Now they're bringing in the wolves. At 3 a.m., the estate was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the server cooling fans. To the guards on patrol, the hallways were empty. To Zara, the shadows were transit routes. She moved through the residential wing like smoke, bypassing the electronic locks with a bypass tool she'd fashioned from a tablet component. She wasn't looking for weapons. She was looking for rot. First was Park Min-ho, Lee's cousin. His suite smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. Zara riffled through the papers on his desk, demands from loan sharks, panicked letters to offshore banks. Suspicious, yes. He was bleeding money. But Minho was a chaotic mess. He lacked the discipline to coordinate with Onyx. He was a liability, not a mastermind. Next was Lieutenant Kang. His laptop was encrypted, but poorly. Zara cracked it in 90 seconds. His history showed massive gambling debts, online poker losses totaling millions. But as Zara scrolled, she frowned. The losses were too regular. The timestamps overlapped with times Kang was on active duty standing next to Lee. These weren't real debts, they were manufactured. Someone was building a paper trail to frame him or to force him into submission. Finally, she entered the suite of Kim Jae-wook. The strategist's room was terrifyingly sterile. The bed was made with military precision. The desk was bare. No dust. No personality. It was the room of a man who owned nothing because he planned to leave at a moment's notice. Zara opened the closet. Perfectly aligned suits. She checked the vents. Clean. She moved to the writing desk and picked up a heavy, expensive fountain pen. The weight was off, too heavy at the cap. She unscrewed the top mechanism. Inside wasn't an ink reservoir, but a shielded data chip. She slotted it into her palm reader. It was a mirroring program, the same one bypassing the security cameras. Jae-wook wasn't just the trader. He was the architect. Down in the study, Lee Dong-hyuk was pouring his fourth scotch. He hadn't slept. He was watching the security feeds, staring at the faces of men he had known for 20 years, wondering which one would put a knife in his back. "You should sleep," Zara said, stepping out of the shadows. Lee laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Sleep is for men who trust their locks, Ms. Coleman. I built this brotherhood from the gutter. Minho and I starved together in Busan. Jae-wook, he saved my life in Incheon. How does a man reconcile that with the knife at his throat?" "People change when the stakes change," Zara said, her voice devoid of pity. "Loyalty is expensive. Betrayal is profitable." She didn't tell him about Jae-wook yet. A cornered animal bites. She needed the traitor to feel safe until the trap was sprung. "Come," she said, "we have work to do." For the next 2 hours, the estate was transformed. Zara moved with frantic efficiency, but she didn't touch the armory. Instead, she raided the maintenance sheds and the chemical storage. She strung monofilament fishing line across stairwells at ankle height. She mixed cleaning chemicals into pressurized sprayers, rigged to motion sensors. She loosened the banisters on the upper landings and turned the marble foyer into a frictionless kill zone using industrial lubricants. Lee watched her, confused. He gestured to the wall of assault rifles in his panic room. "We have enough firepower to hold off a battalion. Why are you setting tripwires like a child playing pranks?" Zara stopped, holding a coil of wire. She looked at the guns, then at Lee. "Guns make noise," she said softly. "This is a war. There will be noise." "No," Zara corrected him. "Guns tell the enemy where you are. Guns bring backup. Guns turn a tactical defense into a chaotic brawl where stray bullets kill the principal." She tied the wire tight, her eyes dark. "Silence is control. I don't want them to fight back, Lee. I want them to disappear before they realize they're dying." She finished the last trap, a pressure plate under the rug in the main hallway wired to a flashbang rigged from magnesium strips. Suddenly, the tablet on her wrist vibrated, a single sharp pulse. Zara froze. She looked at the screen. The seismic sensors she had buried a mile down the road, the ones Onyx didn't know about, had picked up a rhythm. Footsteps. Soft, coordinated, and heavy? "Is it them?" Lee asked, seeing the shift in her posture. Zara checked the time. 4:48 a.m., the darkest part of the night. "Get to the safe room," she ordered, drawing a combat knife from her boot. "The first wave is here." The new moon hung invisible in the ink-black sky, a perfect void for an execution. The estate was silent, but it was a vibrating silence, tight as a piano wire about to snap. Zara crouched on the slate roof of the east wing, melting into the shadows. The thermal scope over her left eye painted the world in grayscale heat signatures. At 0200 hours, the first heat blooms appeared at the perimeter wall. 4 of them, perfectly synchronized. No talking, no wasted movement. They fired pneumatic grappling hooks wrapped in sound-dampening foam. The claws latched onto the stone, coping with barely a whisper. Wave 1. The infiltrators. They scaled the 30-foot wall in seconds. As the point man swung over the ledge, his boot touched the slate patio. Click. The pressure plate Zara had rigged under a loose flagstone triggered a burst of pressurized capsaicin gas upward. The man jerked back, his scream choked off by discipline, hands clawing at his melting eyes. Before the second man could unholster his weapon, Zara dropped from the roof above him. She landed silently, her forearm crushing his windpipe into unconsciousness. The third and fourth men turned, raising silenced pistols. Zara moved inside their guard, a blur of calculated violence. A palm strike to the temple dropped one. A sleeper hold neutralized the other. 4 elite killers down. Total engagement time, 18 seconds. The silence held. "Roof clear," she whispered into her comms. "Lee, stay put. They're setting up high." Wave 2. The Overwatch. 2 heat signatures appeared on the adjacent villa rooftop, 600 yards out. Snipers setting up angles on Lee's panic room exits. They were good. They had found the only vantage point the estate's cameras missed, but they hadn't accounted for the drainage tunnel Zara had found in the basement. She moved through the narrow, rat-infested maintenance shaft that ran beneath the garden, emerging behind the neighboring villa's HVAC unit. She came up behind the spotter first. A swift blow to the carotid artery with the hilt of her knife. He slumped without a sound. The shooter sensed the movement, turning fast, bringing his rifle around. Zara stepped inside the barrel's arc, shattering his wrist with a targeted strike before slamming his head into the AC unit. 2 more down. Still no gunfire. Then, the front gates exploded. Wave 3. The hammer. The blast shattered the night, blowing the wrought iron gates inward. A dozen heavily armed operatives in tactical gear swarmed up the driveway, using flashbangs to blind the estate's exterior cameras. This was the distraction. The loud, messy assault designed to panic the target. Lee couldn't stay in the bunker. The noise drew him out, his ego refusing to let him cower while his empire burned. He emerged onto the grand marble staircase just as the assault team breached the foyer doors. He saw Zara drop from the second-floor balcony. She didn't land like a person. She landed like a munition. She hit the center of the formation. Lee watched, mesmerized and horrified, as she tore through 12 highly trained mercenaries. It was a dance of brutal efficiency. She used their own momentum against them, redirecting gun barrels, shattering knees, dislocating shoulders with terrifying precision. She moved too fast for them to track, a phantom in a tactical jacket, weaving through the chaos. She grabbed the squad leader's rifle barrel, twisting it out of his hands and using the stock to crack his jaw, spinning him into the path of another attacker. When the last man fell, the silence crashed back down, heavier than before. The air was thick with smoke from the flashbangs and the copper smell of blood. The image burned itself into Lee's memory. Zara stood on the steps, her chest heaving slightly. She held a captured pistol raised, steady as stone, scanning the darkness beyond the shattered doors. Lee stood beside her in his impeccable suit, the contrast jarring. Behind them, a dozen broken bodies were scattered across the white marble steps like discarded toys. In the distance, fires from the breached gate lit the smoke orange. Lee stared at the carnage. He looked at the men groaning on the ground, incapacitated, but breathing. "You didn't kill them," Lee whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. He had expected a massacre, not surgery. Zara didn't lower her weapon. Her eyes remained fixed on the tree line beyond the drive. "Dead men don't talk," she said coldly, "and I need to know who sent them." She ejected the magazine, checked the load, and slammed it back home. "Reload, Lee!" That was just the warm-up. The mercenaries had been loud, angry, and undisciplined. They were the hammer. What came next was the scalpel. Zara stood in the shadowed archway of the west corridor, watching the surveillance feed on her wrist. A new squad had breached the perimeter. They didn't run, they flowed. They moved in a tight diamond formation, weapons raised, sweeping sectors with mechanical efficiency. They checked corners the mercenaries had ignored. They used hand signals Zara hadn't seen in 5 years. Her blood ran cold, then hot. "Onyx," she whispered. The shift in her was instant. The detached professional vanished, replaced by something jagged and personal. These weren't strangers. These were the ghosts of her past life, men and women trained by the same instructors, using the same playbook she had memorized. She watched the point man signal a breach of the library. Standard entry protocol: flash, sweep, clear. Zara moved. She didn't set a trap this time. She became the trap. As the team entered the library, moving toward the blind spots, Zara dropped from the ceiling rafters not behind them, but inside their formation. It was a suicide move for anyone else. For her, it was a countermeasure. She knew their spacing. She knew their blind firing angles. She jammed the barrel of the point man's rifle into the floor, using the leverage to snap his wrist, then spun him as a human shield against the second operative. She didn't strike to disable anymore. She struck to dismantle, a throat punch that crushed cartilage, a knee to the femoral nerve. "Beta protocol has a flaw," she hissed into the ear of the last operative as she choked him into unconsciousness. "You overcommit to the right flank." She dropped his limp body. She was breathing hard, her eyes dark voids. This wasn't work anymore. It was an exorcism. Deep inside the panic room, the air was recycled and stale. Lee stood by the monitors, watching the feeds go dark one by one. "They are getting closer," Lee said, turning to Kim Jae-wook. "Is the extraction team ready?" Jae-wook stood by the heavy steel door. He was checking his watch. He looked calm. Too calm. "The extraction team is here, sir," Jae-wook said softly. He reached for the keypad on the wall, but instead of locking down the blast doors, he entered an override code. The heavy bolts retracted with a groan. The door hissed open. Lee froze. "What are you doing?" "You just opened the perimeter. I closed the deal," Jae-wook replied, turning to face his boss. There was no malice in his eyes, just a cold, terrifying pragmatism. "Onyx doesn't want the syndicate, Lee. They want the ledgers. And they want you." "I treated you like a brother," Lee said, the betrayal hitting him harder than a bullet. "And brothers die for each other," Jae-wook said, stepping aside as 4 masked operatives in tactical gray gear stepped into the room, weapons raised. "But I prefer to live." The Onyx team leader stepped forward, raising a suppressed pistol toward Lee's chest. "Target secured. Prepare for immediate liquidation of all witnesses." Lee stared down the barrel, realizing his empire, his power, his money. It meant nothing. He was going to die in a concrete box, sold by his best friend. Then, the world ended. Click. The lights in the panic room died. The ventilation hum cut out. Absolute, suffocating darkness swallowed them. "Night vision!" the team leader shouted. But before they could toggle their optics, a sound tore through the room. Not a gunshot. The wet, heavy sound of bone hitting concrete. Thud. "Contact left!" someone screamed, firing blindly. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a microsecond, just enough to see a silhouette moving faster than humanly possible. Snap. A scream. Crack. Another body hitting the floor. It took 6 seconds. When the emergency red halogens flickered to life, the 4 Onyx operatives were crumpled on the floor, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Standing over them was Zara. She was covered in dust and blood, none of it hers. One hand held a combat knife, the other gripped the collar of Kim Jae-wook's pristine suit. She threw the strategist to the floor at Lee's feet. Jae-wook gasped, clutching a broken nose, blood ruining his silk tie. Lee looked from the unconscious operatives to the woman breathing steadily in the red light. She hadn't just saved him. She had walked into a firing squad and killed the lights. "He tried to sell you," Zara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I canceled the transaction." Lee looked down at the man who had been his shadow for a decade, seeing the abyss he had almost fallen into. He looked back at Zara, and for the first time, he didn't see an employee. He saw the only truth left in his world. "Tie him up," Lee commanded, his voice ice. "We have questions." The silence that followed the chaos in the panic room was short-lived. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the main foyer, reverberating through the shattered corridors of the estate. Zara froze. She knew that rhythm. She knew the arrogant cadence of those hands. "Stay here," she told Lee, pushing him behind a marble pillar. "Who is it?" Lee asked, wiping blood from his lip. "The man who taught me how to breathe underwater," Zara said, her voice tight. "And the man who tried to drown me." She stepped out onto the mezzanine. Below, standing amidst the debris of the front gates and the bodies of his own men, stood Commander Reeve Dalton. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He wore a long charcoal coat, his hands gloved, his face scarred and utterly relaxed. He looked less like a soldier and more like a CEO of a demolition company. "Soul suits you, Zara," Dalton called out, his voice smooth, carrying effortlessly up the stairs. "Better than a black site in Kosovo, anyway. Though the braids, a bit sentimental, don't you think?" Zara walked down the stairs, every muscle in her body coiled. "Go home, Reeve. The mission is scrubbed." Dalton laughed, stepping over a groaning mercenary without looking down. "The mission?" "Zara, look around you. This isn't a mission. It's a correction. You think you can hide here? Play bodyguard for a glorified gangster?" He gestured to the ruined estate. "Onyx isn't just a program. We are the architecture. We own the senators who write the laws, the generals who deploy the troops, and the banks that fund the wars. You're not fighting a unit, you're fighting the world." "Then I'll burn it down," Zara said, reaching the bottom step. "You're a broken tool, Zara. I should have scrapped you years ago." Dalton moved. It wasn't the frenzied speed of the mercenaries or the mechanical precision of the breach team. It was heavy, overwhelming force. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, launching a kick that Zara barely blocked. The impact sent a shockwave through her bones. They clashed in the center of the foyer. It was a brutal, ugly collision of masters. Dalton knew her style. He had designed it. He countered her strikes before she threw them. He caught her fist, twisting her arm with sickening torque, slamming her into the marble floor. Zara gasped, rolling away as his boot cracked the stone where her head had been. "You hesitate!" Dalton roared, landing a knee to her ribs that knocked the wind out of her. "That's why you failed in Europe. You confuse mercy with strength." He grabbed her by the tactical vest and hurled her into a jagged remnants of a glass display case. Zara crashed through it, shards slicing her skin. She lay there for a second, gasping, blood dripping into her eye. Lee watched from the balcony, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had seen violence his entire life. He had seen men beaten to death in alleyways. But this was different. This was intimate. It was a conversation spoken in broken bones. Dalton loomed over her, drawing a serrated combat knife. "Do you have any last words? Or just more excuses?" Zara looked up. Her lip was split, her face bloody. But her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with clarity. "You're right," she wheezed. "I did hesitate." She grabbed a shard of thick plate glass from the floor. "But not today." As Dalton lunged, Zara didn't block. She stepped into the blade. The knife pierced the shoulder of her tactical jacket, missing the artery by an inch. She took the hit to close the gap. Trapped in close quarters, Dalton's reach meant nothing. Zara drove the shard of glass into the soft armor under his armpit, severing the nerve cluster. Dalton roared, his arm going dead. Zara didn't stop. She swept his legs, driving him to the ground with a guttural scream. She mounted him, pinning his good arm with her knee, and ripped the knife from her own shoulder. She held the blade against Dalton's throat. A single millimeter of pressure would end him. The room went dead silent. Dalton stared up at her, panting, eyes wide with shock and fury. "Do it," Dalton hissed. "Finish the mission." Lee leaned over the railing, expecting the kill. In his world, you didn't leave an enemy like this alive. Zara's hand trembled, adrenaline warring with discipline. She looked at the man who had made her a weapon, the man who represented every nightmare she had tried to outrun. Then, she pulled the knife back. She reversed the grip and smashed the heavy pommel into Dalton's temple. He collapsed, unconscious but alive. Zara stood up, swaying slightly, blood soaking the left side of her jacket. She dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the marble. Lee walked down the stairs, staring at the fallen commander. "He will come back. You should have killed him." Zara wiped the blood from her eyes and looked at Lee. The expression on her face was far more terrifying than the rage of the battle. It was the cold, hollow look of a woman who had stripped away her humanity to survive. "Death is easy, Lee. Death is an escape," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm going to make him talk. I want every name, every safe house, every account number Onyx has buried in the dark." She looked down at Dalton's body. "Death is mercy," she whispered, "and I'm all out of mercy." Lee watched her, a chill running down his spine. He realized then that he hadn't just hired a bodyguard. He had hired a reckoning. The sun rose over Seoul like a bruise, casting a sickly violet light across the ruined estate. The silence that had fallen after the battle was now broken by the wail of sirens, dozens of them converging from every direction. Lee Dong-hyuk stood on the shattered balcony, looking down at the courtyard. It looked like a battlefield from a history book. 53 men lay scattered across the marble steps, the driveway, and the manicured gardens. Some were groaning, nursing shattered limbs. Others were zip-tied and unconscious. Not a single one was dead. "It's a masterpiece," Lee murmured, though he felt no triumph, only a cold dread. Black SUVs tore through the remains of the front gate. Men in windbreakers with NIS stenciled on the back poured out, flanked by emergency medical teams and foreign liaisons who looked too sharp, too clean, to be mere diplomats. Zara stood beside Lee, watching the rescue operation with narrow eyes. She wasn't looking at their faces, she was looking at the tablet on her wrist. "Don't smile," Zara said, her voice flat. This isn't a rescue. It's a containment team. They are national intelligence, Lee said. They are here to arrest the assassins. Look at the frequency spectrum. Zara tapped the screen, showing a jagged, rhythmic wave. The NIS comms are piggybacking on a sub-layer of encryption. It's the same handshake code Dalton's team used. Onyx is listening to every word they say. They're probably directing the cleanup. Lee gripped the railing. He had spent 20 years bribing officials, but this was different. He wasn't fighting the law, he was fighting the architects of the law. By saving him, Zara had forced Onyx to reveal just how deep their roots went. She hadn't just protected a crime boss, she had declared war on a global shadow network. We need to move, Zara said. Before they decide you're better off as a casualty of the investigation. They retreated to the sub-basement, where Kim Jae-wook was zip-tied to a heavy steel chair. The strategist looked small now. His nose was reset with tape, his expensive suit ruined. Zara didn't shout. She didn't hit him. She simply placed the Onyx data chip she had found in his pen on the table in front of him. Tell him, Zara said. Jae-wook looked at Lee, tears of pain and shame mixing with the blood on his face. It wasn't about the money, Hyung-nim. It was the promise. They said they could wipe the slate clean. They wanted me dead for money laundering? Lee asked, confused. For the ledgers? No, Jae-wook whispered, shaking his head. You don't understand. They don't just want you dead. If they kill you, you become a martyr, a legend. He looked up, his eyes haunted. Onyx's goal is erasure. They have a team ready to scrub the databases, your birth certificate, your property deeds, your bank accounts. They were going to plant evidence that you were an informant for the North. They were going to dismantle your history until the name Lee Dong-hyuk meant nothing but treason and shame. Then, only then, would they let you die. The room went cold. Lee felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. Assassination was a business risk. Erasure was an existential horror. The ledgers, Lee realized. They prove Onyx exists. That's why they need to discredit me before they kill me. Yes, Jae-wook wept. They are going to rewrite the story and you won't be in it. Zara stepped forward, her shadow falling over the traitor. They missed their deadline. An hour later, they were in a safe house, a nondescript apartment in Mapogu that not even Jae-wook knew about. Lee stood by the window, watching the city wake up. The news reports were already spinning the story. Gang war at luxury estate. Casualties unknown. The cover-up had begun. What happens now? Lee asked. We can't go back to the estate. My organization is compromised. My assets will be frozen by noon. Zara was cleaning her gun at the kitchen table. She looked tired, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving her battered and bruised. But her hands were steady. We don't go back, she said. We go forward. She slotted the barrel back into the slide. Dalton is in custody, but he won't stay there long. Onyx will extract him. They'll regroup. They'll send something worse next time. Worse than 50 assassins? Much worse. They sent soldiers because they thought you were a criminal. Now they know you're a combatant. Zara stood up and walked to the window, standing beside the man who had hired her as a shield and who now needed her as a sword. You spent 20 years building walls to keep enemies out, Zara said, staring at the gray morning sky. But the walls don't matter anymore. From here on, your enemies won't hide in shadows, Lee. She turned to him, her eyes burning with a dark, dangerous promise. They are the shadows. The Black Serpent Syndicate did not survive the night. It evolved. In the 48 hours following the assault, Lee Dong-hyuk dismantled his own empire with the same ruthless efficiency Zara had used on his enemies. He didn't wait for the NIS to freeze his assets. He liquidated them. The illegal gambling dens in Gangnam? Shuttered. The smuggling routes through Incheon? Severed. The lieutenants who had hesitated, who had waited to see if the king would fall? They were paid off and exiled, stripped of rank and influence. In their place, a new structure emerged: legitimate logistics fronts, high-end security contracting, shell corporations layered so deep within international finance laws that even Onyx would need a decade to untangle them. Legitimacy, Lee told his remaining loyalists, is the ultimate camouflage. While Lee rebuilt the body of the organization, Zara sharpened its mind. She set up a command center in the sub-basement of the new safe house. The walls were covered in digital maps, timelines, and connection webs. The data chip from Jaewook's pen and the interrogation of Commander Dalton had yielded a treasure trove. Zara wasn't just looking at names, she was looking at the nervous system of the world's most dangerous shadow government. She traced Onyx funding to banks in Zurich, political campaigns in Washington, and tech conglomerates in Tokyo. They aren't just a unit, Zara muttered, tracing a red line from a Seoul senator to a defense contractor in Virginia. They're a parasite. 3 days later, just as the sun began to bleed gold over the Han River, Lee found Zara on the rooftop of their new headquarters. She was leaning against the parapet, looking out over the waking city. She wore fresh clothes, civilian gear, but with the distinct, efficient fit of tactical wear. The tactical jacket was gone, but the posture remained. Lee stood beside her. He lit a cigarette, the smoke drifting into the cool morning air. The police report calls it a gang dispute gone wrong, Lee said. The NIS has sealed the records. Dalton has been extradited to a U.S. military base for medical treatment. They are burying it, just as you said. They have to, Zara replied, not looking away from the horizon. If they admit what happened, they admit they lost. We survived, Lee said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. Survival is a low bar, Zara countered. She turned to him. The bruises on her face were fading, but the intensity in her eyes hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had crystallized. You hired me to stop a bullet, Lee, but we both know the gun is still pointed at us. Lee nodded. He looked at the woman who had decimated an army for him. A week ago, she was a stranger he hired out of desperation. Now, she was the only person on Earth who knew the weight of the war they were in. They were an impossible pair. A Korean crime lord trying to wash the blood off his hands, and a Western Black Ops ghost trying to find a reason to keep fighting. The world said they should be enemies. Fate had made them partners. My empire is gone, Zara. The Black Serpent is dead, Lee said quietly. I have the money. I have the ledgers. I could disappear. We both could. He paused, studying her profile. What now? Zara looked at the city below, millions of people living their lives, completely unaware of the monsters controlling the strings in the dark. She thought of Onyx. She thought of the 50 men broken on the stones of the estate. She thought of the years she spent running, hiding, waiting for a bullet in the back. She wasn't running anymore. Now, Zara repeated. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the shadows of the skyscrapers were longest. She didn't smile. It was something more dangerous than a smile. It was a resolve cold enough to freeze the blood of a commander halfway across the world. We stop being the prey, she said. She pushed off the parapet, walking past Lee toward the stairwell, her boots echoing with purpose. We go hunting. Lee watched her go, then took a final drag of his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. He adjusted his cufflinks, buttoned his suit jacket, and followed her into the dark. They are walking into the dark to hunt monsters. You've watched them bleed for 20 minutes. If you leave now without subscribing, you're just a tourist who watches carnage for entertainment but refuses to join the fight. Don't be a bystander. Join the hunt. Subscribe. The war hadn't ended. It had just begun.